occupying downtown Hong Kong, a virtual sea of humanity that's been chanting slogans like resign. That's directed against the chief executive, the top official in Hong Kong, C.Y. Leung, who's a particular target of anger here. And the other demand that people make again and again and again is for what they call universal suffrage. They want true, free and fair elections.
Most of those taking to the Hong Kong streets in protest of a restrictive home government in China are far too young to recall a time when one man went up against one tank and showcased a revolution. But we may soon be seeing new and more aggressive forms of anger from a population that was made promises by Beijing and now sees them reneging, turning their free home into something much less democratic and perhaps much more socialist. Welcome to Midpoint. Dean Cheng is a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Asian Research Center, specializing in China's military and foreign policy. Dean, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Are we seeing perhaps a true change in Chinese government and where they are going now, knowing full well that the young people and the people of Hong Kong are simply not willing to buckle under to a communist rule?
Well, I think that the people in Hong Kong are certainly making themselves heard and are expressing their point of view. The problem is that Beijing has been very, very loud in saying that we aren't interested in what you have to say. Just before the announcement of new rules regarding elections, which is what precipitated all this, the authorities in Beijing released a white paper that basically said, we, the PRC, run Hong Kong, and we will run it as we see fit. And just in the last 24 hours, Beijing again has said that basically they are not interested in negotiating. So I think that we are heading towards a crisis point as huge crowds now basically appear in downtown Hong Kong.
Is it fair to say that perhaps in Beijing's mind, one of the things they don't want to see happen here is for their people on the mainland to learn about what's happening in Hong Kong for fear of what that might do to the people there and what they may want when they see what's happening?
We know that at this point they have instituted a lot of online censorship to try and limit the seepage of news out of Hong Kong into the mainland. For several reasons. One is, as you say, to keep the population within greater, mainland China from protesting. But second of all is because once you open that door, then there are a whole host of issues that could also cause people to take to the streets, whether in Shanghai or Wuhan or Beijing. Everything from consumer product safety to corruption issues to lack of representation.
Would the issue here mostly be economic as well? Because certainly Beijing does not want to lose what Hong Kong becomes. They'll make a lot of money and put an awful lot of cash into the Beijing coffers, so they don't want to knuckle down too hard because maybe more than political or military, that's their biggest concern.
That is a huge concern, and in fact, it's arguably one of the reasons why the authorities in Beijing thus far have limited their intervention and have relied on people like C.Y. Leung and the Hong Kong authorities to try and keep things under control. The question is going to be where the Hong Kong authorities come down. How are they going to walk that very fine line between the demands of the protesters for true democratic representation and the pressure from Beijing to keep everything in line, making money and not making any political waves?
Does the possibility exist, though, that Beijing could actually become very hardline on this, and in their attempt, they're already basically saying to Hong Kong, we're going to pick the people who will run for office there, but to try and make them a more socialistic/communistic society?
Well, I think that when we think about where Beijing is these days, when we use the term communist, it's not so much state running the economy, although state dominates the economy, so much as the old Leninist idea of a vanguard party. There is not going to be a lot of political dissent. There won't be competing elections, competing candidates. That, more than anything else, is what Beijing is signaling Hong Kong. You're free to vote, but you're going to vote among a slate of people we select for you.
Dean, about 20 seconds left. Do you fear that, much like we saw in Tiananmen Square, we may see tanks rolling through Hong Kong anytime soon?
Well, the good news is that the Chinese have created something called the People's Armed Police, which is more trained in riot suppression with water cannon and rubber bullets. So we may not see an initial move that will lead to bloodshed, but rather more contusions and concussions. But in the long term, what I do fear is that Beijing is going to say, we will do whatever it takes to keep Hong Kong in line.
And while you're saying that, we are seeing the the tank man, if you will, that video that we have seen so many times over the years from Tiananmen Square, and that certainly started a global discussion on China. Dean Cheng, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me.
A short break, and we return to dig into what is next on the Chinese plate. Back to the high ground of space. And later this hour, if America has the energy we need to be self-sufficient, if we are becoming so good at digging our own oil, why then would we send it elsewhere? It's right here on Midpoint, where every day we question everything.